Welcome to another episode of 2 Minute Tuesday. Today we're going to talk about one of the most recent releases from Penelope, the Creme Brulee. Now, this is an alteration of the standard architect. Basically, the master blender went through and picked a bunch of hand-selected barrels to create a different profile than what is normal in the architect series, and gave it a fancy little nickname, Creme Brulee. Now, you can think of this pretty similarly to like the Marshmallow Toasted, where it was a similar distiller selection version of the toasted bourbon to get a different profile, a little bit of different flavor, and make it kind of something special and unique. From my understanding, all of these, like the Creme Brulee, the Marshmallow Toast, these are one-offs for right now. These are special blends. So they're kind of a limited time thing. They're kind of sort of an LE, but given it's Penelope, they're not quite as limited as, say, like the Havana, the Rio, or like the 15 and 17 year American light whiskeys that have been released in the past. However, don't expect this to sit on the shelf for very long because they're only making so much of it because, again, it's hand-selected barrels, it's a little different than the standard blending process, so it makes it a little more interesting. This is coming in at 110 proof, and yes, it's using French oak stave, so for those who aren't big fans of French oak, that might get in your way a little bit. It should be noted, selection breakdown on the back indicates that they used complex stave and that it is aged at least 5 years. Let's break into the Creme Brulee and get on with 2 Minute Tuesday. Nice. Pretty good color, especially for only 5 years. Let's see, okay, there's like little legs, but they're kind of sparse, so that might be an age thing. Let's get on the nose. Creme Brulee is right on. So right up front, this has a very vanilla forward and kind of custardy thing going on, much like a Creme Brulee. And I can see why the naming is as it is, because it smells very vanilla forward, very custardy, very much like a Creme Brulee. And there is a little bit of that kind of like torched sugar thing going on. There's not a lot of the spice that I usually get with most MGP-based products like Penelope. I'm very curious to see how that shows up on the palate and whether or not we get some of that more standard MGP profile. Oh, there it is. So this isn't super viscous. It doesn't hang in there crazy long, but what I will say is up front, creme brulee, kind of custard and vanilla and a little bit of burnt sugar, desserty sweetness. But there is a little bit of baking spice coming into the back end. Not so much the pepper that I usually get out of an MGP product, but closer to that like allspice kind of thing that was going on in the Remus Experimental that we did last week. Really, compared to normal architects, I've tried architect a couple of times from some friends and I've never been impressed with it. A lot of the French oak things just are blah to me. They're not really super impressive, but this, on the other hand, is. And maybe it's because it has that big kind of custard-like dessert note going on and gets away from that standard MGP profile where it's more oak and lather and pepper with a touch of citrus. This is much more dessert forward with just a hint of spice under there, adding some complexity to it. And I think maybe that's why I'm, in the moment, appreciating this quite a bit more than I would other French oak, because it just gets so much more away from the standard profile and accents it in a different way. So what's the overall score on the Creme Brulee? I'm going to go with a 73. I think this is actually really good, especially considering most of the other architects where I would probably rate them in like the low 60s. This is a nice change. It doesn't have that more youthful flavor to it that I tend to encounter with the architect. Despite being 5 years, this has a more complex flavor to it. It's just really dominated by that upfront Creme Brulee note, and amply named for it. But that's not a bad thing. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That's just the difference that separates good whiskey from incredible whiskey, right? Is that good whiskey will follow a profile, it'll give you one or two really great notes, and nothing is bad about it. Great whiskey is incredibly complex. You keep coming back to it, you keep testing something different, and it really just lights up your palate, and it's a delight to drink instead of something where you're just like, that was pretty good. You're going, oh man. You know, that's the difference between good and great whiskey and incredible whiskey. And this is good whiskey, and there's nothing wrong with that. Considering its price, which was pretty similar to the 9-year, but it's only a 5-year product, I think this was about $70 out the door, if I recall. Up front, that creme brulee kind of custard thing is just so different than most bourbons that you get out of MGP in any way, shape, or form, that it's kind of like a curveball in a way, and it gives you a little surprise, but it's that like, oh, kind of surprise, and not that, I don't know about that kind of surprise, right? It's a delightful thing to encounter. But that being said, like, again, I go back to this. It doesn't linger super long. Other than that creme brulee note, nothing's big and punchy. So it's kind of got that one big vanilla custardy thing up front. And then it fades into a lot more muted flavors. Like the baking spice kind of thing is there, but it's muted. There's a little bit of oak, but it's muted. There's a little bit of that kind of burnt sugar, but it's muted. It really is that big creamy kind of vanilla note up front, but if that's what you want, this is great. So should you go try to track this down? If you don't typically like French oak, I think you might want to avoid it. But if you kind of are okay on the fence or do love French oak, find this, because that big upfront kind of vanilla custard thing is really lovely. And normally I get a little bit of vanilla out of French oak, but not that big creamy kind of custard note. And having it is a nice little dessert compared to a lot of the other whiskeys that I tend to drink. So having something in my selection that gives me a curveball to what I'm normally tasting and lets my palate kind of have a bit more of a dance and play with different flavors is inherently appealing. What are your thoughts? Have you tried a lot of the Penelope stuff before? Have you tried the Architect? Were you unimpressed with the Architect like I was, but now listening to my crazy self say, this really does taste like creme brulee, are you interested in trying to find one of these, or at least find it at a bar and have a pour of it and get a taste? Let me know in the comments down below. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing. That is literally the best way to help us small whiskey tubers grow. It helps tell Papa YouTube like, hey, I like this, and someone else might as well. And as a bonus, when we hit 500 subscribers, I'm going to give away a number of sample flights of some really incredible whiskey, and then when we hit 1,000 subscribers, I'm going to give away a bottle of E.H. Taylor single barrel and probably a few others. As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.